speaker, I guess we're sticking a little bit with the coffee theme, but going in a slightly different direction. Our next speaker is Dave Asprey, who's the founder of Bulletproof. He's got quite the resume. He's an author of a New York Times bestseller, The Bulletproof Diet. He's also a Silicon Valley investor and technology entrepreneur. But really with Bulletproof, it started with an over 2-decade journey, and I guess it also cost him $300,000 kind of hacking his own biology, which was really the impetus for starting Bulletproof. And Bulletproof today is kind of a brand and a movement. It focuses on helping your body and mind achieve a high state of performance. Their flagship product, Bulletproof Coffee, is a blend of coffee, grass-fed butter, and brain octane oil. Where I guess we're going to be sampling it later today at our expo, so stick around for some of that. In addition, the company sells a host of different products, including supplements, snacks, and a now ready-to-drink beverage called Fat Water. To reach consumers, they've developed a highly tuned approach to e-commerce and digital marketing that engages their followers on a daily basis. And they've also recently opened 2 cafes here in Los Angeles. So today, Dave is going to give us some insight into the Bulletproof story, share some of the ideas behind Bulletproof's approach, and talk about the fundamentals of e-commerce and branding that are being used to fuel their growth. So Dave, take it away. Thanks.
I spent about 15 years working in Silicon Valley. My first big success was the company that held Google's first server, which was about disrupting telephone companies because they were dumb. Who likes telephone companies? We can say that in here, right? And from there, everything that I've done in Silicon Valley has been disruptive. I've run strategy for a couple of billion-dollar companies that have absolutely nothing to do with beverages, but they did have an awful lot to do with PowerPoint presentations, which is why today I will not be giving you a PowerPoint presentation, because I'm CEO. I don't have to. And PowerPoint, oh God, how many more times? I used to dream in PowerPoint, so I'm done with that. Now, what we're going to talk about is how Bulletproof came to be and what the heck is a Silicon Valley guy doing in the beverage business. And what I'm doing is a subset of what's happening in the food business, and that's what my whole career has been about, which is about disruption. And it's about taking something that's been done one way and saying, can't we do it very differently and have a different outcome? And the reason this matters to me so much is that I used to weigh 300 pounds. And I did something differently, had a different outcome, and I'm reasonably happy with how I look, especially because I barely exercise, which is kind of cool. Now, how did I do that? Biohacking. And biohacking is this idea that you can change the environment around you in order to cause your biology to change, so you can have control of your biology. And I started looking at what are the things that I want in order to have more control of my body that I can't buy today, and maybe I could make a few of those things, and maybe 100 other people will be as interested in them as me, and hey, it's the internet. You can launch products that only 100 people want. And today we call that Kickstarter. Back when I started doing this stuff, we just called it like sending emails to friends. But whatever you want to call it today, there's lots of beverages being launched on Kickstarter. People are crowdfunding things. Most of them have no chance of success because, well, the people don't know anything about the industry. I have a lot of retail experience. I once in college, when I was starting the first e-commerce company that sold t-shirts, I worked at Baskin-Robbins at the same time to make ends meet. So I've scooped ice cream with the best of them. And that is the entire extent of my retail operations experience. Yet I'm CEO of a company that will soon have 4 Bulletproof coffee shops, and we're growing rapidly with venture backing. Why? Because I'm totally happy to hire people who have industry experience. The person who opened the first 4 Starbucks regions is the head of my retail operations, which is why I feel confident going out to do that, because I hire people with a lot more experience than I do, which is funny because that's what you do when you're disrupting industries. You don't come in like a crazy person and just do stuff because the titans of industry will stomp right on your head. What you do instead is you come in with a very different message and a different value proposition, and you actually really do things differently, and then demand will shift. The bet behind Bulletproof is that, well, for the last 40 or so years, the American government, and by de facto standards, the rest of the world, has taken on this position that sugar is just a calorie. And it's the same as canola oil, and it's the same as butter, and it's the same as white rice or gluten. However, as a former obese person, I can tell you that's a load of crap. It doesn't matter how many marketing dollars Coca-Cola, sorry if you're here, I'm not really picking on you, the soda, big soda, puts into that message, it actually doesn't work. And we have increasing amounts of obesity. So as an obese guy who didn't like having blood sugar swings that made me feel crappy when I was trying to do strategy at these big companies, I had to solve the problem. So I'd go to the cafeteria and eat chicken breasts and do weird things like that almost all of you have tried to do in an effort to stay thin or feel good, right? Well, eventually I said, why can't I buy things that let me do this? Why can't I buy a beverage that doesn't contain sugar or something that's more harmful that's a sugar substitute, right? Like, that's kind of cool. I see this is getting into our business now. Like, we've got monk fruit up here, which is really interesting. It's not sugar, yet it tastes sweet, and it doesn't kill you. Like, that's kind of a good thing. NutraSweet, sorry, I'll just be really blunt. If you're selling that stuff, you should stop it, because people are kind of figuring that out, and it used to be easy to use marketing dollars to fight it, but now with social media, it's hard to use marketing dollars to fight something that's readily apparent to the many people who get migraines and other neurodegenerative conditions as a result of that kind of sweetener. So what used to work, which was just tell people what you want them to believe, spend enough money on it, and they'll believe it, and then you can sell a lot of stuff, it's changing a little bit. The results have to match because people are figuring these results out faster. The backstory for Bulletproof, though, is back when I lost my 100 pounds, I said, I also want to learn meditation. I want to learn this from the masters. So, like a crazy entrepreneur, I went to Tibet. This was more than 10 years ago. I'd already done high-altitude mountaineering, and I knew to expect to feel like a zombie at 18,000 feet elevation. So I'm in a remote western part of Tibet called Mount Kailash. And if you're from India or China, perhaps, you've heard of Mount Kailash because it's the headwaters of the Indus and Ganges rivers, and it's the holiest mountain in two of the world's largest religions because the gods live sort of at the top of that. You don't climb the mountain, but you walk in a 26-mile circle around it. I showed up late, as in there were no more tourists there because it was 10 degrees below zero. There were only 8 people on the mountain, other than a few people who lived in these little guest houses, the local Tibetans. So I'm feeling like death, which is what happens when it's 10 degrees below zero, when your water tube from your Camelback that's insulated is frozen solid, and you're sort of stumbling around thinking, why did I ever do this to myself? Like, this actually sucks. And then I get into a guest house, and these are little mud huts. Guest house is a very loose term. And this little Tibetan lady who stands almost up to my waist, there's great photos because I'm unusually tall and they're unusually short, given that there's no air where they live. And she gives me this little bowl of yak butter tea. And if you've ever had the misfortune of tasting yak butter tea, it's not that creamy and delicious. It's not bad, though, if it's fresh. But it's got salt, weak tea. Turns out it's pu'er tea, if it's made traditionally. And it's got butter from yaks in it, which is revered because it's about the only kind of fat you can get at that altitude. And I drank it, and I'm like, wow, my brain turned on, like in a new and different way. Like, I felt better than I had in a long time. I'd been a raw vegan for a year before that, too, as part of my dietary experiment stuff. And I'm like, what's going on? But it was such a strong feeling. Say, how is it possible that I'm like wanting to dance at 18,000 feet instead of wanting to just die? And it was that made me come back and start hacking. And hacking is a really cool term now. You can life hack, you can hack your phone bill, you can hack your mom, you can hack whatever you want. So it's been misused at this point, but it doesn't really matter, because what I started doing was saying, how do I recreate this beverage? So I bought some butter, I bought some tea, and it tasted like crap, and it didn't make me feel good. Now, this is really important. Make me feel good. That's what mattered more than taste. Because the people that I hang with, by the way, I have 20 million podcast downloads this week. We haven't announced that yet. That's 2-3 million people on social every month. We send millions of emails every month. So the people I hang with are more than a small amount of the population, but actually they're still tiny compared to 300 million. But we'll drink bowls of gravel mixed with liver if it makes us feel good, right? Fortunately, that doesn't make you feel good, because that's not good. Have I tried a raw liver smoothie? Absolutely, and you should not try that. Now, the whole core thing here is whatever I put in my mouth is going to affect how my brain works, how my body works, how much energy I have, whether I have control of my emotions, whether I look good in the mirror. That's all that matters. So you can make a product that tastes really gross, and if you tell people it's good for them, they'll drink it for a while. And if it's actually good for them, they'll keep drinking it and they'll tell all their friends. And this is something that's really rough because historically, all you had to do was get people to feel good for a short period of time. And there's a very quick recipe for that. It's called caffeine and sugar. Maybe a little salt if you want to get savory, but that's all it takes. People will do that all day long. There's animals, like lots of species of animals, who will seek out caffeine-containing plants and eat them because caffeine is so amazing. So we can take advantage of that. The problem is that now we're understanding there are adrenal effects and things like this. You probably don't hear about that unless you're in the really focused health category. Having a green juice without a little pinch of salt in it actually stresses out your adrenals. It makes you more tired and more weak. Did you know that cutting salt below the recommended levels that the government has, or even at the recommended levels, increases heart attack risk? They've pushed the levels down so far that you're getting pressure from regulatory to have less salt in your beverage, but people who drink it are going to get tired because there isn't enough salt in it. So we're facing kind of a weird situation. What I'm here to share today, though, is a perspective that's probably very different from yours if you haven't figured that out already, but it's also fresh in that I haven't been there's a word for this from tech, but after a while you get groupthink, where everyone in an industry acts the same way, and I don't quite have that yet, although it's happening because it happens when you walk into the same walls that everyone else who's come before you have walked into. And I certainly learned from that and from hiring people who've done it. But one of the things that drives me crazy is the regulatory side. And as a beverage company, we can't use some ingredients, at least, well, we can, we're just not in the US. These are ingredients that are really effective, that actually make people live longer, feel better, smarter. Try including a smart drug in your beverage, and you know what's going to happen. You're going to get a warning letter. There's no reason for that. None whatsoever. It's just there. It's just regulatory. As someone who uses smart drugs on a regular basis, in fact, I'm on 2 of them right now, that's a problem. And for consumers right now who want to put things like, medicinal mushrooms into their green beverage, they want to buy it and you're not allowed to sell it. So what's happening is people are doing it anyway, which makes me laugh with glee. These are the Kickstarter innovators, and they're the ones who are going to get shut down, which makes me sad because I'd rather that they succeed. But what I believe you will be seeing is a bunch of weird upstarts doing things that shouldn't be done and probably aren't allowed. They'll grow quickly because they're doing things that customers actually want, and then they'll get slapped down by regulatory because they're doing something that broke a rule that no sane person would ever make, so those young entrepreneurs didn't think to do it. If they don't have good legal representation, if they're not sitting in this room, they probably aren't going to fall into those pitfalls. And that's something that I've seen before, and I predict it's going to happen a lot more. One of the things that you can do, or I should say we can do as an industry, is to push those limits, push the regulatory limits, and to fight the good fight there that says, actually, we're allowed to make truthful claims. For instance, coffee. Every week, a new study comes out. They say things like, coffee makes you live longer, coffee and depression, coffee and heart disease, coffee and diabetes, coffee and cancer. I don't ever talk about those things because those are big words that are bad. And right now, the perspective from the regulatory side is that, look, if it's on the website, it's on the label, which is an unreasonable standard, and it's not true in other countries, but it is true in the US. I know multiple companies, if you go to their .co.uk websites, you can read the truth. And if you go to their .com website in the US, you see things like, helps to maintain healthy levels of normalcy. Great claim, right? Sorry, not allowed by regulatory. Normalcy can't be quantified, right? FTC claims, those are even more expensive than FDA claims. What the hell? How many of you right now are never certain that what you're saying on your bottle is okay? Okay, a few of you are willing to raise your hands. It doesn't matter what you say, you're still exposed, which is a really interesting place to be. So what does that mean you do? It means you charge more, and you just add lots of money to the legal side of things, just in case, right? You basically come loaded for a fight. At least that's what I do. I have, helping to support Bulletproof, people who've gone to the Supreme Court twice fighting against this kind of stuff. So the idea is that you want to say smart things that are truthful and that are not going to get you in hot water, but that if you get in hot water, you have a pretty good parachute and jumping board, whatever you use to get out of hot water. I never thought about that problem before. But you want to come ready for that. And I find a lot of smaller brands who are now coming to Bulletproof saying, how did you do that? We want to talk. That they haven't thought about that whatsoever. And for me, it's one of the biggest things that I'm concerned about. Because there's 500,000 words of content on the Bulletproof website. This week, I just launched my second, fingers crossed, New York Times best-selling book about hacking the human body. The second book is a cookbook, which is kind of cool. I encourage all of you to buy it, by the way. I'll sign it for you. But if you were to buy that book, and you were to look at the flavor profiles of those foods, and you were to look at the ingredients, you'd find a lot of those are ingredients that you don't use in your kitchen today, and you probably haven't thought about putting in beverages, but they're things that we did put in beverages. A prime example there is our RTD beverage, which is called fat water. Like, when you look at that, I'm hoping that there's a little bit of revulsion. That's by design, which means when the average consumer who's been programmed to think that if you eat fat, you'll get fat, therefore only bad people get fat. In fact, if I enjoy fat, I'm probably a bad person and mommy doesn't love me, which is kind of the consumer psychology, unconscious, subconscious, internal messaging that we all have. I want them to go, what the hell? Which is good, because I'm disrupting something. And what I'm disrupting is that belief that fat's bad for you. So they're going to pick up the bottle and say, how can this be possible? And they're going to see that there's a saturated fat. Oh my God, the worst kind. Did you know that? The canola oil industry has told you that it's a bad kind, and you should believe that. It turns out that the kind of saturated fat that we're using is very, very unusual, and it doesn't raise cholesterol even slightly. In fact, it's not even metabolized like a saturated fat, and it probably shouldn't be categorized that way. But it was categorized that way in 1992 by a bunch of people who apparently didn't read biology textbooks, they only read chemistry textbooks. And to this day, it is illegal for me to say it's a healthy saturated fat. In fact, any saturated fat cannot be labeled as healthy, and a lot of you probably know that. So Stumptown's doing a coconut milk beverage which contains saturated fats. That's not healthy, except if you go to the average consumer and you say, is coconut milk healthy? They'll say, oh my God, it's so much healthier than milk. Like, there's all kinds of problems with milk. Milk has these things in it, and you'll have a long conversation about A1 versus A2 casein if you get one of the people who's like me, or you'll have just a normal conversation that says, I've heard milk makes you fat, which is the much more common thing. Whatever it is, milk isn't a panacea the way it once was. So we have a major issue, and my biggest issue right now is my hands are tied behind me by regulatory, because on one hand, in the business, I'm interviewing experts from around the world 2 times a week, talking about the latest things that influence the human body, but I'm also not allowed to say the actual things that are there. So all the studies pointing to coffee and any disease, they're not on the website, but they should be, and people deserve to know. What this means for you is that if you have a beverage that does healthy stuff, and you're not allowed to say that it does healthy stuff, you should have pretty good evidence it does healthy stuff, but you also should have people who are not employees or paid by the company who support your message and talk about it a lot. And if you have unpaid brand ambassadors who might get like a few cases of your beverage on a regular basis, that might be helpful. How many ambassadors does Bulletproof have? I don't know, but it's a lot, like at least 100. And in order to do that, you'd want to have a brand that people really like and appreciate. And that is one of the reasons that the Bulletproof brand is where it is today, is that we do what Lululemon does, which is brand ambassadors. So there are CrossFit athletes, world champion athletes, people who are aerial acrobats, bobsled champions, few people in more cognitive demanding realms, people who are memory experts, and they do it because it's actually helped them. And if you're selling green juice, there's a great green juice community who will do the same thing for you. And if you're selling high fructose corn syrup mixed with some other random stuff, you're probably not going to be able to take advantage of that unless you're a monster. In which case, actually, you can. So what this comes down to is the value of your brand and how engaged you are with influencers. But one of the things that's made Bulletproof grow so quickly is that ability to connect with people, which is the core part of brand value. And I would love to tell you, here's the 10-step recipe. In fact, this would be a great blog post if you like clickbait headlines. Here's the 10 things to do to create a great brand. But there isn't such a thing, because the brand that you're building is built in partnership with the community that you're serving, which means if you know your customers really, really well, what you say for your brand and what you do and how your package looks and how it feels and the experience of opening it, all of that stuff is different. And what that means is that to build a brand, what you do is you figure out who your target market is, and then you spend as much time with them as you possibly can, and you understand them psychologically. Ideally, you are one of them, and you show them that you're one of them, and you overshare information. And you realize that they're your partners in building your brand, and that your biggest fans are what help you do that. And this may sound like some sort of marketing rah-rah strategy. I don't know another way to build a brand. All of the companies that I've built up until now, or helped to build more likely, have enjoyed pretty darn strong customer advocacy, even though a lot of them were, we're disrupting the switch and routing business. It's really exciting. Let me tell you about how to secure your laptop, right? Even there, you get rabid fans because people have this tribal drive that's part of our biology that's not really a conscious part of the biology. And when they identify with what you're doing, you can do something really, really big. So I wish I had a really specific thing to tell you about building a brand other than figure out what that core market wants. What I'm working on now, though, is what else can we do? Do we expand markets, or do we expand product lines? And I'm doing neither one. I'm doing something that my friend Joe Polish, who runs the Genius Network, which is a relatively large high-end marketing, I don't know what to call it, networking group that meets once a year with guys like Richard Branson and very influential executives. It's removing annoyances. So the thing that annoys me the most right now is that when I'm thirsty and I want to drink something, you know what I drink? It's really exciting. I drink water and maybe it has bubbles in it. Why? Because almost everything I can get is full of fructose. It might be natural, fresh, squeezed fructose, but I could show you like dozens of studies that say fructose raises triglycerides, and it's not going to make me live to 200, and that's one of my many goals. Maybe only 180, I'd be okay with that. And I'm not even kidding. Like, I actually fully expect that to be a possibility, and if it is a possibility, then I'll do everything I can right now to make sure that that happens in 50 or 100 years. It's the same thing that Ray Kurzweil. In fact, when you go to a meeting of very successful CEOs running companies more than $100 million, I challenge you to find a CEO who doesn't have a pocket full of supplements, who isn't on this same challenge, who isn't paying attention to what he drinks or what she drinks. It is that big of a sea change where the most successful people are paying the most attention, and it flows down from them. You don't see Twinkie-eating professional athletes unless they're paid a lot to eat Twinkies. What you see is they're saying, like the LA Lakers, oh, we went paleo, oh, we're drinking Bulletproof coffee. Stuff like that happens, and it happens organically. So you are existing in a world like that where it's going to continue changing. So I was incredibly stoked to see that Stumptown is coming out with a coconut-based beverage, because I tell you, the market would rather have coconut than they would yet another sugary beverage. At the same time, there'll be a huge number of beverages out there that have 20 grams of sugar, 1 gram of coconut milk, and huge stickers on the front that say, coconut, coconut, did you know coconut? And we'll use weasel words, because we're not going to be allowed to say it's healthy, so we'll say things like supports normalcy and other things like that. But consumers already know that coconut milk is probably a better choice than a lot of other things. So what I'm going to do now is have some time for questions. I have 40 seconds left, but I think the most important thing we can do is just have a one-on-one connection.
Well, let's have a seat for a second.
All right.
We'll go a little more than 40 seconds, but yeah, not too much time for questions. But I guess, first and foremost, I think one of the things that we're seeing in this industry are people who are coming from tech and Silicon Valley and getting interested in food and beverage. And I guess I'm curious, just as someone who's, in that space, like, why do you think that's happening? And, is that something that we're going to continue to see?
If you've spent a good part of your career sitting, staring at a screen, writing code, you spend a lot of time looking at what's going on in your head, and you get really annoyed when you're tired. And the normal path for this, at least if you're from my generation, you drank Jolt Cola. And the more modern, younger programmers would be drinking whatever the current energy craze of the day is, and you do this. But after you hit about 26, you realize, A, you're getting fat, and like your body starts to hurt, and that it's not working very well. And you start realizing, wait a minute, I make a living with this up here, and if what I'm doing doesn't support this, I don't get paid as much. And it's actually irritating when you're trying to write code and you can't pay attention. In fact, it's incredibly frustrating. So you're going to do what it takes, and you're going to try pizza, and you're going to try staying up all night. You're going to do all the dumb things that young people tend to do, and you're going to realize none of that works. And if I want to keep doing what I get paid to do, I want to keep putting food on the table, then I'm going to have to pay attention to this, and I'm going to have to do it. And what we find is that changes come, and when they can't find the things they want, programmers, all we do is solve problems all day long. Like you look at it, isn't there a better way to hack that, to route around that, to write better code? We see the world that way. So when I see a wall of sugary beverages, I'm like, okay, how do you hack that? Well, you put fat in one, because when I have fat, I feel better, and when I have sugar, I don't feel better. So there you go. But it's that thinking about hacking that does it. Sure.
And I guess, you guys started with fat water. I assume a coffee beverage is probably somewhere in the future, right?
I'm investigating it. There's some difficulties with coffee. When you make coffee with a metal filter, it has coffee oil in it, and coffee oil does magic things for your brain. It's very different to drink a French press or espresso versus a paper-filtered coffee. So most cold brew leaves the coffee oils in the cold beans, not where you want them. So I'm looking for a way to make a non-bitter, flavorful, properly brewed RTD.
Just got to keep hacking, I guess, huh?
We'll get there.
Awesome. Well, hey, I think that's all we have for time. So thanks a lot, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks,